Welcome to WP Bosses. This is episode Luke, where we talk to Luke Carbis from XWP. Let's just quickly go around and everyone introduce yourself, starting with Paul. Who are you?
Hi, I'm Paul Luxford, and I run a company called Gold Coast Business Websites. We do WordPress websites and also run a service called WP Genie, which is a website maintenance service. That's me. Thanks.
Excellent. Nik, who are you?
I am Nik. In fact, Nik Cree, and I've got a web development agency called Positive Business Online, and we also build WordPress websites. Based up here on the Gold Coast. We're currently looking out over the top of the Commonwealth Games, and from here I cannot see the swimming because it's too far away. So that's why I'm here on WP Bosses.
That's a shame. Tracey, who are you?
I'm Tracey Kemp from Get Web Creative. I also build WordPress websites, funnily enough. Although I'm working for an agency most of the time these days, so not doing a lot of freelance work.
And Luke, who are you?
Hi, I'm Luke Carbis. I work for XWP. We're a VIP agency. I spend most of my time championing product and innovation initiatives.
Sounds good. And I'm Robey Lawrence from Bearded Friend. I do build WordPress websites, and I'm also a full-time beard grower. It is a little bit shorter at the moment because I did shave it recently, this morning, in fact. But that's me. Another thing I want to mention is we are sponsored for a Zoom license from WP Engine, so thank you very much for that. We used to use Google Hangouts and had a few different issues, but so that's kind of the reason for that. But we're here clearer than ever, so treat your ears and your eyes to another 45 minutes or so of interview fun. We are on YouTube and iTunes and all the other podcasting places. Nik, you brought a plugin for us.
I bought a plugin. Actually, there's a number of plugins like this. I've just come back from Sydney from a business conference down there and saw demoed a new plugin, which is a chat plugin for websites. Now, you might have seen things like the Talk plugin or other ones that visitors to the site, they can chat to you by sort of live chat, or if you're not there, then they can leave a message. The problem with it is that for developers, that's all good because we're all across this sort of stuff, even though I miss all the messages that come through on my live chat. But one of the things that people have open about 18 to 36 minutes a day is one particular app on the web, which would be called the Facebook. So Facebook has got this thing called Messenger. So the plugin that we're looking at is one called Live Chat with Facebook Messenger, which sits down at the bottom right or bottom left-hand side of your screen. So people who are at your website that want to ask a question, they can just click that, open it up, and it opens up on your website, the Facebook Messenger, and they can just type in, and that goes straight through into your Facebook Messenger app on your phone, and you can answer it from there. If you're really cunning with Facebook Messenger these days, they do have scripted responses, so which will pick up keywords. So if there's a keyword saying, I would like a quote for, or what's the price of something, it will automatically respond. You've got a program in it, but it'll automatically respond to saying, sounds like you're looking for a price for XYZ widget. Is that correct? I click yes. And the next pops up is the pricing page on your website or wherever it happens to be. But you can script a whole lot of common questions into Facebook Messenger. There are apps like, I think, ManyChat, but certainly some of the live chat plugins that are out there now allow you to have that on your website and use Facebook Messenger as the delivery mechanism, so it goes through to your phone. Good thing about it is that chances are that they have their messenger on their phone 24/7. So if you reply back to them, they get an instant notification. So good for conversions and bumps in sales. Let's see how long it lasts with Facebook now wanting to charge for per view now. It's no longer per audience. It's almost like per view that they're charging you when you're putting your ads out. But there's another channel which has been picked up now and seems to be working quite well with a number of clients. So that's my plugin.
Pay-per-view Facebook.
Let me ask you a question. Out of you four, how many of you still have Facebook?
Yeah, I'm on Facebook.
I have to say I've got it, but the number of times I've posted in the last 6 months is probably about 4 times, and that was in the past week when I was down in Sydney.
Have you any of you had any second thoughts given all this privacy stuff that's been happening?
I have a little bit. Probably 80% of the reason that I use Facebook is because of the groups that I'm in. And some of those groups have actually started going back to forums that are outside of Facebook again. And I kind of enjoy that because I can just go to that group for that group and not get distracted by other notifications. I've actually installed a browser extension that when I go to Facebook, it just hides the whole feed so that I don't get distracted by all of that. But yes, the security and privacy thing is something I've been thinking more about recently.
Yeah, I think you guys should do an episode on the GDPR stuff. That's all this stuff that's happening in Europe and how it's going to be affecting WordPress. You know, there's a whole WordPress work group focused on it at the moment, so that could be really interesting.
Yeah, we touched on it.
Involved in that, Luke?
What's that, Tracey?
In the WordPress space, who's involved in all of that?
I couldn't tell you.
You don't know?
I know a couple of people, but I don't know who's really championing it.
I think it's a really good topic. I've had a handful of clients here that do deal over in the European countries, and it's been a real concern for them. And they're having to craft up their policies and ensure that their security on their sites are tight enough to comply with the legislation. So it is a bit of a minefield. And I think, I mean, people here in Australia or this end of the world here, you know, it's easy to ignore it, but I think, you know, ignore it at our peril because it does affect us and can have some fairly serious ramifications if we don't really deal with it effectively as website owners over here and developers here.
So
yeah, I think
how does that affect, so does that affect like keeping data on a server? Like, you know, for example, when Gravity Forms, you know, maintains a contact, you know, database, all that sort of stuff. Is that part of it? I think I was reading something about that.
Especially if you're collecting any personally identifiable information, like a full name, then you're definitely affected. If any European person fills out a full name, then you know you're subject to those GDPR laws and can cop a pretty massive fine.
Right. So what do you have to do with that data? Do you have to like make it disappear or something as soon as you get it, or is it?
It's mostly. I think it's mostly about your privacy policy. I'm not the right person to ask. You should have a whole call.
Yeah, we should have an episode. I think from what I understand is you have to make it easily accessible for the end user to be able to delete all of their information if they so
information.
Yeah, it's actually more than that. It's that's not the important part of it, and it probably is an episode in itself. The really important part of it is that if you have a data breach, how you deal with that data breach. And what policies you've got around that data breach, and to one, prevent data breaches, so your security, and secondly, if you do have a data breach or suspect a data breach, how you notify everybody and how you deal with it. So you need to have processes and procedures already in place to cover it if that happens, because it's not if it happens, it's when it happens. So it's just one of these things you can't really sort of sit on your hands and sort of say, oh, she'll be right. It's, you know, if it happens, it happens, because if it does happen, it could have some serious financial and legal implications for you.
I'd take this opportunity then to give a plug to Stream, which is a plugin that I helped to develop, one of XWP's plugins. and stream logs all of the activity that happens in the back end of your site. So, I mean, that probably has some GDPR implications in and of itself, but also it's going to affect visitors. It's going to help you discover data breaches and figure out exactly what was breached.
Yeah.
Actually, funnily enough, a client of mine that deals in Europe, that was the plugin that she had recommended to her down in Adelaide at a seminar she was at. She was recommended that install Stream, so she asked me to install Stream. Fortunately, we already had it installed.
Nice.
Just a quick disclaimer before we move on. We are not lawyers. Please do your own research, yada, yada, yada. This is not a sponsored ad. So Luke, tell us a little bit about 18-year-old Luke and what you were doing at the time and what you were striving towards, if anything.
18-year-old Luke was getting into a lot of trouble. I guess 18-year-old Luke had just finished school. I'd been almost kicked out of school multiple times for being caught hacking and all of that sort of thing. So I dabbled a lot, and really early on, I got a job doing IT support for a software company in Brisbane. And it wasn't long before the programmers were coming to me for help with their JavaScript code, even though I was just in support. And so that was kind of cool. And then after I left that job, I, again, like this is still when I was really young, started a business doing SEO before SEO was ever a thing. And that didn't really work out. But I think it was just ahead of my time.
So did it not work out because you didn't know what you're doing, or because you were sort of more interested in hacking things, or what was the reason?
It didn't work out because it was two 18 to 20-year-olds spending most of their day playing Counter-Strike and occasionally doing a little bit of work in between. But it's where I got my start with WordPress and started, doing child themes and started hacking at themes and figuring out this PHP thing.
So what was your first...
Have you had any formal training with PHP and coding, or is it just something that's been self-taught and you've picked up?
Yeah, totally self-taught. I did a little bit of IT at uni and flunked it pretty badly. So I gave that up pretty quickly. In my defense, it was Java.
Oh, right, okay.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
That explains it. I think all of us would flunk as well, wouldn't we?
So you're
So what you're saying is PHP is so much easier.
Oh, it really is. It really is. Especially starting out. I think it's a really accessible language. I think it's really easy to start hacking at and get started on, as opposed to some of the other languages where you really have to understand, complex methodologies. I didn't learn what object-oriented programming was until many years after I learned how to program in PHP. But good luck doing that with something like C#.
Yeah, I've heard about these things, objects, and I was thinking I must learn about those.
Well, that's a good thing about PHP, right? Is you don't have to in order to write code to get things working,
So how did you learn? Were you a cut and paste coder? Were you grab a bit of PHP and stick it in and find out what happens, or were you reading books, or how did it all come about?
Yeah, very much a cut and paste coder. Combine that with, here's my recipe, cut and paste coding, and then combine that with like jumping in the deep end before you're ready. I did a lot of that, taking on client work or even jobs sometimes, which I knew I wasn't able to do, and I just had to figure it out as I go. That was scary. But the thing that actually brought it all together for me was attending WordCamp Gold Coast in like 2000. Do you remember when that was, Tracey?
2011. Yeah.
And that was my first WordCamp, and I remember a talk by Jafe, where he talked about WordPress coding standards. And then I had a long chat with Dion Halls and Dan, who was working on WP e-commerce, and sort of they inspired this, the importance of coding standards. And once I really was able to grab a hold of that, I think that really took my development to the next level.
So was this before you were part of XWP?
Yeah. I was working for a small agency in Fortitude Valley at that time. And after that, or shortly after that, I started e-commerce. I joined the e-commerce business Visser Labs, which you might have heard of. It's run by Michael Visser, another Brisbaneite. And I went to school with him, so we're close friends. And so, we were working on WP e-commerce, and it was right around the time when WooCommerce just came out and Jigo Shop just came out, and there was that whole controversy. And so, yeah, I remember all those. Those were the good old days when I was first cutting my teeth.
So when and how did you transition from there to joining XWP?
It's a bit of a complicated journey. So I was looking for work at the time, and I'd interviewed with one place. I was living on the Sunshine Coast, and I interviewed somewhere in Brisbane, and it was a really good wage, but I didn't like the commute. I had this phone call out of the blue, and it's this guy called Dave, and he says, "Oh, I found your wife's blog. She seems really cool. I noticed you're a programmer. Do you want a job?" And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" And he said, "Well, I've got this little WordPress startup, and you're in the WordPress space." And so, he offered me a job, and it was working from home, which was a real plus to me because I didn't have to commute. So I took the job and started working on this plugin called Stream, which we talked about earlier. Long story short, it ended up being me and Frankie Jarrett working on Stream. And Frankie took a job with GoDaddy, and just after that, Stream was acquired by XWP. And so I joined XWP in that product role because I had the experience working in the product side of the business with Stream, as well as doing lead development.
So why would you ever sell something like Stream? Because surely something like that there would be destined to make you a lot of money and to get you onto the worldwide sort of stage there in terms of development, as a name in your own right.
Yeah, it's a really good question. When Stream 1 first launched, we launched it in Austin, at WordCamp Austin, and it got so much good press. Like, everybody was raving about how awesome it was. And it really was. It was great. It was free and open source and all the rest of it. The first thing we said was, all right, Stream is doing really well. How can we monetize it? And so we started dreaming up all of these ways of trying to monetize this free product that we'd made. And, we invented different payment plans and different pricing options and different monetization strategies. And we built this whole cloud service where instead of storing your Stream records in the database, we'd store them in an Elasticsearch cluster, hosted on AWS. And it was, a paid service with a free tier. And so we launched Stream 2, and we got a lot of really negative press around that. It was right around the time that there was a lot of dissatisfaction, let's call it, with the way that the US was handling data, and lots of people not being very trustworthy, or not feeling that the United States government was very trustworthy. And there'd been some major data breaches. And so there was a lot of consternation around the fact that we were hosting this fairly sensitive data in the cloud. And actually Stream 2 did really poorly. And because we all of a sudden had server costs and other things that we're paying to maintain, Stream 2 didn't work out as a business model at all. Went downhill pretty quickly. And things were pretty dire for us for a while. And that's when, we had to let a few people go, and all of those like scary startup things. I created a plan to transition. It got to the point where Stream had to shut down, basically. We had migrated everybody's data out of their WordPress installs into the cloud, and we just couldn't maintain that infrastructure cost, so we had to shut it down. There was sort of no two ways about it. And so there was sort of two ways of doing it. Either we just sort of flip the switch and say, sorry guys, see you later. Or I created this plan where we would maintain like all the records in the cloud for another 30 days, and then released Stream 3, which would then restore the ability to store Stream records locally and migrate them back, which was fairly complicated. So I worked really hard on banging out Stream 3, and our investors very graciously gave us the extra money that we needed to allow all of our cloud users to migrate back to locally, to give them a window to do that, which, you know, they knew they were going to get no return on necessarily. Once, I think it was the fact that we did that, and when XWP saw that, you know, we actually cared about our users, and that we recognized the mistake that we'd made, and we went to some considerate effort to resolve that. I think that they recognized that there was a good opportunity there in terms of, you know, the team members that were part of Stream and the brand that Stream, the good parts of the brand that Stream still held. And so that's why they offered to acquire us after we'd launched Stream 3. And so, you know, it was very attractive to us, because the plan was, let's launch Stream 3 and find a new job, because we'll open source it and we won't work on it full time anymore. So XWP acquiring it was really good.
And what's been the path or the advantages of, say, an organisation like XWP acquiring it, apart from you know, getting you sort of through all that and getting you into a position with XWP for the plugin itself and for the people that are using it? What have really been the benefits of it?
One of the things I've realized about XWP is that it's really genuine in its commitment to its mission, which is to build a better web. I've come to think of XWP less as like an agency and more as a Mozilla type figure, which is really just looking for every opportunity to build tools and to empower developers to and site owners to make their websites better. And you know, if everybody's able to do that, then the web becomes better. And so XWP is really committed to core technologies that sort of underpin the web as best it can. Of course, when it comes to the web, I believe, and I think a lot of people, especially WordPress listeners, would believe that the best thing for the web is that it's an open web. And the best possible, the most used open web solution in existence is WordPress. And so to me, WordPress is like the key ingredient to keeping the open web open. And that's why XWP is like really focused in on the WordPress space. Stream, of course, helps site owners to better understand what's happening on their websites. And you know, by keeping site owners engaged with how their websites operate, we expect that websites become better and better, and that contributes to building a better web.
So for you as a entrepreneur, someone who's, you know, been involved in developing quite a widely used plugin, like it really, you know, did get quite a lot of downloads and a lot of people were using it, which I guess, as you've mentioned, has come with its benefits and has come with its costs as you're making your decisions in the development of it all. But as a person who's, you know, come through that journey of, you know, leaving high school, leaving PHP, creating your own plugin and business, and now working for someone else, what's that transition been like? Yeah,
you'd think it'd be a bigger transition than it was. I guess because I stepped out of running my own business, or it was a partnership business, into a startup, and it was a remote working startup. There wasn't actually that big of a difference there. And then and also the nature of Stream at the time was really, we were given a lot of empowerment to lead the company in what we felt was the best direction. And then stepping into XWP, again, it wasn't actually that big a divide. It's the sort of business that really empowers me to make decisions that I think are going to be, have good effects on the web. And really, I feel like I have some sway in terms of leading the business down a path that's going to work really well. And so to me, there's not actually that much difference between running my own business and working at XWP. I don't know if the same would be true for every business that, every agency or every sort of software development place in the world. I think remote work is a really big part of that, though.
Remote work, you feel like you're still working for yourself, essentially.
Yeah, I remember when I used to work for an agency and I had a boss and a creative director, staring over my shoulder all the time, and it was office hours, expected to arrive by 8:30 and leave at 5, and half an hour for lunch. And that when I started my own business, that was part of the attraction, right? No commute, work from home. You guys know I have 3 little kids, and so getting to spend more time with them. And so, yeah, that's definitely a big part of it for me.
So to segue that passion of yours and of your companies of making the web or making WordPress a better place, and in turn making the web a better place, is that passion what Tide was born from? Can you tell us a bit about Tide?
Yeah, absolutely, it is. So we realized that the people that are responsible for making the web more secure, more performant, better quality are plugin and theme developers. At the end of the day, they're the ones who write the code that powers the web. And we also, because XWP are the maintainers or partly maintainers of the WordPress coding standards, PHP code sniffer, that's a mouthful. So we realized that actually onboarding and getting someone set up so that all of the code that they write is automatically sniffed, automatically checked against the WordPress coding standards isn't actually that easy. And we make sure that all of our developers internally are set up like this. But to get it set up, you've got to install PHP code sniffer. In order to install that, you've got to install pair, and those 2 things are not really necessarily very easy. And you've got to install the WordPress coding standards, sniffs. You've got to put them in the right place. And you've got to remember also to update them regularly. And so you have to get into your terminal regularly and change directory into the right directory and use Git and update them. And then you've got to get your IDE, like PHP Storm or whatever you use, to then interact with PHP code sniffer and show you inline code sniffs. And you probably want to set up a pre-commit hook to make sure that you're not ever committing code that doesn't conform to the standards. And we have our ways of doing that internally, but we realized it's really not accessible. It's not easy for most developers to do that at all. It's this hugely complicated process. And ideally, you want people to do it who are just starting out with learning to develop, right? You want people to learn good habits from the very start. So the question was, and the thing that Tide is trying to solve is, how can we make coding standards more accessible? How can we make it easier for people who write code to check against their standards? And the standards exist to make code better performing, more secure, better quality, more maintainable, less bugs, all of that sort of stuff. So that's how Tide was born. That's the vision for Tide, and it continues to be. In fact, the name is related to that because we figured that if we can inspire or encourage all of, a bunch of WordPress developers, theme and plugin developers, to increase the quality of their code. Well, WordPress it's like over 30% of the web, right? And so if we can increase the quality of the code that powers most WordPress sites, then we're really making a huge dent in the quality of the web. And that was really motivating to us. And that's what inspired Tide.
Yeah, nice. So is Tide an application you install, or is Tide a service, or is Tide a plugin? How do you interact with Tide?
Yeah, so what Tide is a service that exists on a server. It's open source so that you can spin up your own instance of it, and also an API to interact with that service. So the service will take code, plugin or theme, and run a bunch of audits on it, code sniffs and that sort of thing, and return results. And you can interact with the service via an API. You can send the API some code. The API will send you back the results. And that's basically what Tide is right now. What we hope to see it become is a little bit different from that, because that still isn't accessible to most people. What we'd really like to see is close integration with WordPress.org, so that you can go to WordPress.org maybe one day. It could be so that you go to WordPress.org/Tide or make.wordpress.org/Tide and have the ability to upload code directly there and test it out. That's one possible future. Certainly, there's a number of steps involved in getting there. The first step that we're taking, though, is related to PHP compatibility. So one of the most important things about installing plugins on your website is you need to check that they're compatible with the version of PHP that you're running. This is especially important if you're running PHP 7, or if you're not running PHP 7, even more important rather. So basically, the first step in trying to get more closer integration with WordPress.org is we're integrating PHP compatibility results that come from Tide into WordPress.org. So basically what Tide's going to do is be scanning the .org plugin and theme directory. Every time a new plugin or theme is updated or submitted, Tide will then scan that. It will actually be doing all of the code sniffs and stuff like that. But for now, we'll focus on the PHP compatibility checking. And Tide will then return a result saying this code is definitely compatible with the PHP version 5.3, and it may cause problems with PHP 5.2. You may want to just double check before installing it on 5.2. And that information is going to be integrated into WordPress.org. That's the very first step.
Yeah, that sounds super helpful for people just getting into writing plugins and themes.
Yeah, I hope so. And longer term is closer integration. So maybe one day WordPress.org will actually feature the code sniff results. Maybe it won't, but that's something I would like to propose. Personally, I'm really interested in the idea of some sort of score to make it really easy for users to understand how good quality the code is of a plugin. But that comes with a lot of complication. That comes with, a lot of baggage. And there's some big discussions that would need to happen in the community before that ever happened. And certainly we're committed to only implementing stuff that the community is keen on. But that's another interesting concept that Tide could say maybe one day, this code is, scores a B+. And I like that because it then encourages developers to want to improve their score.
Mm.
So how much of that is subjective and objective? Because I can imagine that, as you're involved in writing the code for this, that your coding standards and your team's coding standards would come into play here. Yet someone else might have a different approach, and it might be so either equally as valid, or it might be not valid at all. So how do you ensure that the subjectivity sort of elements of it all are removed, and so it's just purely an objective exercise of evaluating code against standards, as opposed to the way that you think code should be written, or your team thinks code should be written?
Yeah, so let's put aside that scoring idea that I sort of threw out there a minute ago, because certainly there are subjective components of that. And it's not even on the roadmap right now. It's just an idea that I think would be kind of cool. But if we just focus in on what Tide currently does, which is code sniffs. So it's not actually, what it sniffs isn't actually what I think is a good idea. And it's not actually what XWP thinks is a good idea. What it sniffs is the WordPress community coding standards. And those are not maintained by Tide. They're their own thing. They exist at github.com/WordPress-coding-standards. I believe that's where they are. And anyone can come along, and if they think that they have a better way of doing things or want to make some adjustments to the standard, anyone can propose that. And that's not really related to Tide, the standards, except for the fact that Tide uses the standards. So if somebody were to say to me, oh, I use different standards for my WordPress theme or plugin, maybe that I'm using PSR2 or some other standard, well, I have to say back to them, that's fine, but you have to understand that Tide is going to give you a really poor result, because Tide uses the community standards, it uses the WordPress standards. And people who are looking at Tide for results need to understand that Tide is giving them the WordPress community standard results. In terms of subjective versus objective, it's completely objective in that way. There's no subjective to it at all.
So how much do you think that, say, something like Tide could influence or feedback into WordPress community in terms of the standards? Because I would imagine that, you know, something like Tide is like if enough people are using it, then you'll see, say, you know, statistics on you know, how many people are submitting code there that doesn't meet WordPress standards versus those that do. So potentially, you know, Tide can be a way of I guess informing people, you know, what are the right or what are the standards that are expected. But equally, it's also a vehicle to feedback to the WordPress community, saying, hey, look, this is where I think you should be heading.
So it's my hope that every plugin and theme developer a year from now is able to easily check their code against the WordPress coding standards, which isn't really the case today. There's no easy way of doing that. I'd like to see that happen, and that's certainly the goal. That's the mission for the product. But I think the best possible case, the best way of that happening is not some external third-party service. It's happening on WordPress.org itself. I think that's the best possible future for Tide, right? And that's going to reach the most developers. It's going to be the most adopted community-wise. And so in that sense, that's what we're working towards. And there's a lot of focus at the moment in the WordPress community on Gutenberg, which has slowed things down a little. But we're trying to figure out, well, how can we make some inroads into .org with Tide? And that's why we've identified just an easy win, low-hanging fruit with PHP compatibility. And then the next step is to brainstorm, how can we get more coding standards information in there? And maybe that's as simple as an automated Tide check when you upload your plugin for the first time. Maybe it's a website, a page on WordPress.org where you can upload code manually and see a result. Maybe that would be a good next step. Maybe it's surfacing results on plugin and theme information pages on .org. Maybe, I don't think this is necessarily a good idea, but maybe you don't surface those results, but you influence the search results. You know, you influence the search results based on code quality. That could be a really interesting approach. I probably think it's a bit dodgy, to be honest, but you know, there's a lot of different ways we could look at integrating Tide into .org. First step, PHP compatibility, and then looking to the community and to the .org maintainers really for guidance on those next steps.
But it sounds like you're at the very, very early stages of it. Like personally, I'm really excited about it because I think it gives developers a lot of scope to be able to develop themselves in terms of their own skills, particularly those that are just starting out. But not only them, people that are have been in the development community for quite a long time. They've got habits and standards and things that they do right now that maybe don't meet WordPress standards, but this is just the way that they do things. So I mean, you've got something here that's on one hand can really serve the community really well. On the other hand, could really wield a lot of power in terms of the direction of where code goes and what people can do. I personally am quite excited about it because I think it's and certainly knowing you and your values and what you've done in the past, is it something you're looking at the betterment of WordPress and the whole community and the whole open source community. But I mean, I feel that you're probably at version 1.1. If you look at say 10 years time, where would you expect it to be, or probably more, what would you hope would be the case in 10 years time for both WordPress and for what you're able to contribute with us to the whole open source community?
Yeah, so I'll address something you said first, which is that it really is, version, 0.1 or 1.0 or something like that. That said, in order to get it to this point, has been about a year's worth of development work. So we launched it open source at WordCamp US, where Matt Mallenweg talked about Tide during the State of the Word. But at that point, we'd been working on it for over a year. So it's still in its early days for sure, but there's a lot to it. There's a lot that's gone into it. 10 years is probably a little bit too far, more far than I feel comfortable forecasting. Let's stick to 3. In 3 years' time, I think Tide will be just integrated into the development workflow for most developers, and it's going to be really easy. So what will happen is you'll install, I really like PHP Storm, but what do you guys use?
I use Coda.
Coda, yeah?
Yep.
So, yep.
Coda as well.
Cool. I used to use Coda before.
I use a developer. I use a developer who does all my work for me.
Okay.
I don't do much PHP, but for all the little bits and pieces of CSS, I've been using the Microsoft Visual Studio Code. Yeah.
So let's say
Dreamweaver.
Text
editor. So let's go with Coda. You install Coda, and then you go and you look inside Coda. There's probably a extensions section, right? Plugins, and you go, let's install the WordPress extension for Coda. And when you do that, it uses the Tide, uses WordPress coding standards with Tide as a service to automatically check all of the code that you're writing as you're writing it. And it's really just as simple as that. And there's not much more to it than that for the developer. For the user, what I'd really like to see is some way of being able to, so as a user, when I install a plugin, I don't know which plugins are good and which ones are bad. I don't know which ones are buggy and secure and performant, which ones aren't. And I can even install 2 or 3 and hope that they correctly uninstall themselves when I delete them. Or I could go and look at the code for them all. But if I'm not a developer, then I have no chance of doing that. And how, if I'm just like a blogger, I don't really know what I'm doing there, right? So I really hope that there's a way 3 years from now for users to be able to look at the quality of the code that powers each plugin, because I believe that there is a correlation between code quality and lack of bugs. I think there's a correlation between code quality and performance and all of those sorts of things. And so I think if we can somehow surface code quality to the user and make that important to the user, that will really help them make decisions about the best plugins for their website.
I think when you touched on the scoring, I think as a WordPress user, or who does the same thing and goes and gets plugins and hopes to God that they work, it'd be cool to have like in the repo, like to have the quality score there as opposed to the reviews. The rating from other users. It'd be cool to have like a
yeah. Absolutely, I agree. I've floated the idea of scoring with a few people and got a lot of pushback and some really valid points. Yost, he talked with me, and I think that's how you pronounce his name. And he was sort of made some really valid points on why scores might not be such a good idea. And so I don't want to sort of commit to the idea of having. We're definitely putting scoring in there. It needs to really be subject to, community approval. And I think before that can happen, people just need to get used to Tide existing as part of WordPress before we can expect people to trust in this random score that they all of a sudden have been given. You know what I mean?
Well, actually, that's a valid point that Paul's raised. And you've raised this, that we already do have scoring. And the two scores that are used on the WordPress repo is the star rating, which is the reviews that people give, and how many downloads it's had. So both of those are really subjective reviews. We don't really have any objective way of being able to measure, whether the plugin is good or not. And I know that I thought just recently with a project I'm working on now, I went to the WordPress repo looking for something, and there was a plugin there. I can't even remember what it was, but it only had 9,000 downloads. But there were other ones there that had like 50,000 downloads. Turns out that the one that had 9,000 downloads, not many reviews, was a better plugin in terms of the code quality and the way that it functioned than it was the one that had 50,000 downloads and lots of really good reviews. So that really just points to the plugin developer being a good marketer in terms of getting good reviews, which probably contributed to the download. So at the moment there is no objective measure as to whether it works. It's only anecdotal. So if Tide is something that helps to bring some sort of objectivity to it, I suppose from a user's point of view, but also from a developer's point of view, because when we're deploying websites for our customers and we're expecting them to work, and they're expecting them to work, and they've paid reasonable money to make sure that the site is launched and it actually does work. At the moment, it's only subjective. So I do look forward to having something that has got some objectivity around it.
Yeah, I agree. That'd be really important.
Cool project.
Yeah, it's been a lot of work and a lot of emotional labor, as well as it's time spent tapping away in front of the screen. But I think that this has some real opportunity to make an impact and to have some actually make people's lives better in a real way. And so that's what motivates me around it.
So is this a project being worked on full time, or is it working on in parallel with other projects you've got going on? Or is it just you, or do you have a team behind it?
No, it's definitely not just me. I was involved in the very, very early stages pretty heavily, but then quickly transitioned to some teams internally at XWP where I've been more looking at it from a strategy and just being involved, keeping up with where things are at with it. And but there's a team of people that's been working on it. Derek Herman, who's also one of the customizer maintainers, and Jeff Paul is very, very involved. He's he's been a release lead for a few releases now, and deputy release lead. And so we have people internally at XWP working on it, but I do want to stress that this is an open source project. If you want to get involved, you can go to make.wordpress.org/Tide. You can join the Tide channel in WordPress Slack, where we have a weekly meeting there. There are people that are involved outside of XWP contributing to Tide as well. So yeah, it's not purely just an XWP thing at the moment.
Yeah, it looks like you got Google's there, Automatic and WP Engine are sponsoring along with XWP. So yeah.
Yeah, so Google are, at the moment, Tide is hosted on AWS, and Google have offered to help us port that to GCP. So we're porting it to GCP at the moment, and Google's going to pay the infrastructure costs. So that's really helpful, because someone's got to pay those, and so that's good. And then obviously Automatic and WP Engine are helping us port it to the WordPress.org and get the word out about Tide. So that's been helpful. There's also a lot of community support and community feedback outside of just those sponsors, though. So I encourage you guys to get along, or any listeners who are interested to get along to the weekly chats and have a look at github.com/WPTide, and there's opportunities to contribute there.
Awesome.
So can I just do a random move away from Tide and into sort of more existential stuff about the web itself? There's been, with the US elections, there's been all of this talk about Russians hacking in and getting Donald Trump elected to presidency, and all that influence that's there. From the US side, you've got a whole lot of push, for censorship and control of the web, including some of the telcos over there who are wanting to charge for access, which currently is all free. And then you've got this these standards that are starting to come through from governments about how the web actually operates and who's responsible for what. And then you've got Cambridge Analytica, who is embroiled in the scandal with not only Facebook but a number of other places as well. WordPress is really founded on the whole principle of democratization of the web, and giving people a voice and really sort of giving access to information, to both producing it and reading it to everybody. Luke Carbis' take on sort of where we're heading to, for the next 3 to 5 years.
Yeah. So. Wow. It's such a crazy time, right, that we're living in right now. And I tend to be a bit of a techno-optimist about this sort of stuff. I don't want to dive into the politics either, but I can tell you this, that when it comes to control, whether it's the US government or Russian hackers or whoever trying to take over the web or telcos, it becomes much, much easier to control a single closed platform or a set few closed platforms than it is to control a completely distributed system, right? And so the best thing that we can do to fight back against Russian hackers, I think, is create more WordPress websites. In fact, I have no real ill will against some of the WordPress competitors out there, like Squarespace or Wix, but those, and even Medium, are centralized platforms too that lock people into their system. And whenever I see that going on, it's just red flags for me. And I think with everything that's happening with Facebook at the moment, take this, you got to understand where I'm coming from. I haven't been on any sort of social media for years now, but so I'm that kind of person. But I think with everything that's happening with Facebook at the moment, and day after day after day, there's more privacy things, and Facebook deleting executives' emails because they don't want people looking into it and stuff like this. I suggest that Facebook is going the way of MySpace. I don't know. It's a huge thing to sort of suddenly disappear, and they definitely have people hooked. But I think as the optimist in me wants to say people are going to really start recognizing bad habits. And like one of the things I'm really interested from a product point of view is psychology and habit psychology. And Facebook do some pretty evil stuff in terms of manipulating you psychologically to want to stay on Facebook and put everything on Facebook and give Facebook all of your information. So, and I don't think that's tinfoil hat stuff. So I think that people are going to sort of wise up. Do you know what I mean? I think people are going to figure this out, that they're being psychologically manipulated, and start to sort of, I think in 3, 4, 5 years time, people will have more of a bullshit radar sort of thing. You know, you can tell if it's a telemarketer on the phone. I think you'll be able to tell, oh, that's one of those techniques that those websites used to do back in the 2018s to force me to stay on their website and to try and manipulate me. I think people will start to develop that, and hopefully businesses try to act more in good faith and establish business models that aren't about selling user data. So I'll finish my little dialogue with my monologue with like, in order for that to happen, we need to be okay with spending money, because we need to support business models that aren't free, where we're not selling our privacy, where we're not selling ourselves as a product. And so I think we need to find and support businesses that are asking us to maybe pay up front, or I'm really interested in Patreon style models where it's like a gift economy. I think that could be a really interesting future as well. So yeah, there you go. That's what I think.
Can I just ask you, you've obviously heard of the blockchain. Have you considered implications of WordPress within that space?
Yeah,
I think about that often. So I just wanted to see what you think about it. And,
well, what do you think, Paul? If you think about it a lot, I'd love to know what you think.
I just think, I don't know, having my website installed on a decentralized, or having a bit of my website sort of scattered around on everybody's computer. So, having a copy of all my client websites on a server that is not centralized, but it's literally everywhere. I think that's pretty cool, but again, it comes back to, I just think it's really cool because it's going to be super secure, and you'd never lose your website, because if one computer got hacked, then it would all just come back together again. So anyway, what do you think?
That's a really interesting concept. I'm more interested in the idea of self-sovereign identity. Is that a term you've come across?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So this idea that rather than uploading our identities, maybe our usernames and passwords and our first names, and maybe in the case of an online store, our address, we have currently, the way things are set up, we need to we have our address stored on however many online stores you use, right? That you're a part of. Probably there are 20 to 30 businesses just in Australia that know my name and address. And when my address changes, it's impossible to upload them all. So that's an inconvenience, but also it's a privacy issue. So I really am interested in this idea, and it's related to the blockchain of having a self-sovereign identity, being able to prove that I'm me. And I take that identity with the blockchain. That's how I prove that I'm me, because that's a distributed ledger, and it can be a real proof. We're already seeing things along these lines with like PGP keys, being having social proofs and things like this. But yeah, if we can prove that I'm me and distribute that around with some sort of public blockchain ledger, then when I visit your online store, I don't need to give you my address, and I don't need to give you my credit card number or my name even, because that's stored on my private self-sovereign identity that's only stored on my computer and not everywhere else. But you can prove that I'm me via the blockchain, and then I can just give you the parts that you need as you need them. So I guess it's maybe a more difficult concept to explain than I'd anticipated. But the long and short of it for me is that I don't need a username and password for every site that I visit. And that's a really nice feature. And I think that that's a big part of it. I'm interested also in how the blockchain and actually the open web is going to look like once AR and VR technology becomes more widely distributed. I think at the moment with VR and AR, you've got to install Steam and download a game, and it's not very open or easy to move around. But I think the web will power VR in the future, or some version of it. And so having a sovereign identity in that sense is really important, because you don't want to have to log in everywhere you go and upload your avatar. You want to have the same appearance and name and everything everywhere you go. So
what you're really saying is being able to, like the old-fashioned thing is, you walk in, you shake someone's hand, and they already know it's you, but this is just not an online version of it.
Yeah, exactly. And then if you need some information from me, I can see exactly what information you need, and I can just provide it to you automatically by clicking allow. And I don't have to type that in every time. And when it's updated, when I update it for myself, you then have access to that immediately.
So does that mean we are now all open source?
I guess it could mean that. Yeah. We could open source our identity.
There is one application that's being developed that it's being built on the Ethereum, the ERC20 blockchain. So, like everything else as well, that is poising itself towards that. So you'll be able to you'd be able to go overseas without having to carry a passport, all that sort of stuff. So you'd have just a QR code on your phone or something, and you scan that, and that's you. So
now we could get into a whole new privacy discussion about this here, and Big Brother.
That's another topic.
Which is probably the topic of another webinar. That's probably not WP bosses, but
let's talk about how the GDPR would come into a self-sovereign identity.
Nice. Let's find an Australian expert on that.
Yeah, I could ask around. I'll ask around.
I have to say it is curious and reassuring that people in the open source community, and certainly from our discussion here, tend to be a little more open-minded, a little more suspicious, and so privacy-oriented, and probably just question actually what does happen, sort of online with governments, with our information and that type of things, than the average person who's using our websites, I guess you could call it that there. So from that point of view there, I think we have a responsibility, or we can abdicate our responsibility of creating an open source of community and applications that either serve or destroy humanity. So that sounds like a really profound thing.
Yeah, well, I'll just add to that by saying that Australian listeners who want to have some sort of ability to be an activist for privacy and open source standards with the government, with the Australian government, is get involved in Open Source Australia, or it's also called Linux Australia. I'm a member there, and there was recently a petition going around because the government was looking at reviewing its open source policies or whatever. And so, there's opportunity to get involved politically, and otherwise, if you or your listeners want to look into Open Source Australia. I can't remember if it's called Linux Australia or Open Source Australia. A quick DuckDuckGo search will tell me the answer.
Doesn't quite roll off the tongue as well. Let me DuckDuckGo that for you.
Yeah. So you can visit linux.org.au.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's one of the interesting things about the open source community too, that it's all about inclusivity, democratization, and sovereignty.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, it's all sort of part and parcel but, that sort of gets into sort of other discussions itself. But it seems to be that people that are in that sort of community have that same sort of mindset as well too.
Yeah, that's certainly been my experience.
Luke, you've spoken about your passion for making the web a better place, and I think one place where that really comes through is watching you present at WordCamps and Meetups. You really show great patience and passion for helping people, and you really you have a great way of explaining things really well so that people get what you're saying, and it's not going over their heads. I think at a basic level you kind of connect with people. How important do you think getting out into the community and helping people make better code in person as opposed to just working on these projects online is? And will we be seeing you doing a little bit more of that in the future with this Tide project as well?
Tracey, remind me to chat with you more often. You make me feel really good about it. It's kind of you to say so. Yeah, I mean, I love to talk through this with people. A lot of the time you'll find that developers, especially when it comes to coding standards, have a tendency of being a little bit conceited about things, of like, my way of doing it is better than your way of doing it. And
I feel intimidated.
I'm not invulnerable to that. I can sometimes come across that way too, because at the end of the day, if you're writing WordPress code, you really should be writing it according to the WordPress coding standards. But anyway, yeah. So there's two ways I think that people should be helping out, and if you have an opportunity to help out that affects a large scale to affect change at scale, then you should take that opportunity. But that doesn't discount the opportunities that you have to chat one-on-one, and I certainly relish those, and I love being involved in WordCamps and Meetups. I said I wouldn't get political, but I have tried to take a little bit of a step back from that, just to give other people from different backgrounds and different genders a go at it. And so I sort of have been not as active as I once was, and more on the back end, trying to encourage other people to step up. Certainly I've found that the WordPress community is a very, very encouraging and friendly place, and certainly a sort of safe place to get out there and start telling people about what you've learned. So if you have the opportunity to, if any of your listeners have the opportunity to, then I'd encourage that. The thing that I like to tell people is this ancient sort of Hebrew proverb. And the proverb is, if you know an aleph, teach an aleph. Aleph is the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet. It's like saying, if you know the letter A, teach the letter A. And so you don't have to be an expert to get out there and start helping out and teaching people, and speaking at meetups and WordCamps about what you know. Just teach about what you've been learning recently. And because at the end of the day, nobody knows everything about everything. And so it's improper for someone, no matter how much experience, to get up on a stage or to sit down with someone one-on-one and say, you know, I know exactly how it should be done. Follow my teachings, Padawan. At the end of the day, we're just teaching what we've been learning. So I think if we can give back in that way, then I encourage all your listeners to do that as well.
Just interestedly, do you have imposter syndrome?
Yeah, all the time, of course. I to be more in the product space than the programming space these days, although I do a lot of programming as well. But so imposter syndrome isn't limited to code. I've felt imposter syndrome as a business owner. I've felt imposter syndrome as a as a freelancer. I'm sure that those are sort of common things, and I often feel imposter syndrome as someone who's really having to provide advice on what's best for a particular product, because what do I know, except for the fact that I've learned a lot about it and I read about it, I'm interested in it, and have to trust my intuition in it. And I think for me, it's going to be different for everyone, I suspect, but for me the best remedy to imposter syndrome is just reminding myself that you got to go with your gut sometimes. You got to just trust your intuition and be okay with admitting mistakes.
So what's the thing that you're like? You've been in the WordPress space probably as long as I have, and I stumbled across it. I often feel that someone like you is better than me, but what I've realised is you've taken a different direction to what I have, and that's okay. And then I see people that are coming through who are just starting out as well too, and sometimes they think, well, there is they feel the same way as well. What sort of advice would you give someone who is today just considering a career starting out in WordPress, whatever it happens to be?
I mean, my advice to anyone just starting out in a career, whether it's WordPress or not, is don't focus on the ladder, or don't focus on what you might think is success, or the wage or the position or anything like that. But what's been really helpful for me is to find a bit of a mantra or a mission statement, something that is able to guide my decisions and focus what I work on. And that for me is to build a better web. And so if you're just starting out in a career, figure out what that might mean to you. Find something that can guide you and just stick with that, as opposed with trying to find the best job or the best whatever. In terms of the WordPress world, I have a fairly controversial opinion that meritocracy is a bit of a joke. I don't believe in meritocracy the same way the rest of the world does. I think it can be a bit toxic sometimes. My advice is just beware of politics that can exist in this space, and don't get discouraged contributing to core. The WordPress community is amazing, especially in real life, but when it comes to track, things can get a little bit short. Things can be a bit blunt. So try not to get discouraged with that. And the best thing you can do in WordPress is just to give back without expectation of return. Really, that's the best thing you can do. That's part of why I don't like meritocracy, is because it sort of says, well, if I give, then I'll get something back for it. But if you give without expectation of return, then I think that that is the most rewarding in the long run.
Well, I certainly think you're an example of someone who really has given and given and given and given without expecting a lot in return. But what I do see of you is that you've actually gained a lot by giving so much as well. And, you're working for or with one of the preeminent WordPress agencies in the world. And you have a lifestyle that's to be envied. And I think, that's all credit to you and the fact that you really have given a whole heap to the community in a number of ways. You've made a lot of mistakes, but in all of those mistakes that you've made, they've all been genuine and all about sort of helping other people in the community to do more and to be more and to get more. So, from my perspective, you're one of the people that I see as one of the epitomes that describes what WordPress is all really about, the democratization of WordPress. And I think, when I saw you come through and, working with XWP, I couldn't have been happier, because I think you've got so much to contribute and you've given us so much as well. So, for me, it's just a real honour to be here on WP Bosses talking with you. So thank you.
Well, thanks so much, Nik. That's a huge compliment. I really appreciate it. And thanks for having me on your show.
Yeah, thanks a lot for coming, Luke, and for putting up with the wide range of questions that we've hurled at you.
Oh, it's been lots of fun.
Well, I look forward to see what happens with Tide, and I'm sure I will see you next time I'm up in the Brisbane area.
Yeah, that'd be good.
And yeah, thanks a lot for coming along and spending an hour on a Tuesday night with us.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nik.
See you
Thanks,
guys.
Luke.
Thank you.